Welcome back to another episode of Bitfinex Talks. I'm your host, Ricardo Martinez. Today, I am blessed to be joined with the one and only Joe Nakamoto, who is a Bitcoin journalist and content creator who's mostly known for traveling around the world and orange pilling Uber drivers. Joe, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm really good, mate. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. I feel bad. I haven't orange pilled an Uber driver this week because I actually haven't been in an Uber. But if I were to be in an Uber, then yes, I would have orange pilled them. Great intro.
Are
Thanks, mate. How are
you
you?
currently traveling, or are you kind of like stationary for the time being?
I'm really trying to be stationary. I have traveled way too much recently with Bitcoin adventures and working far too hard and pushing myself a bit too much. And so, yeah, I'm trying to stay stationary for the summer. So home for me is Portugal, just south of Lisbon. And this is where you have this amazing studio that I've created. And as you can see, I'm not very good at art, so it looks kind of mental. But this is where I'm trying to do my videos and documentaries from.
Yeah. Nice. You got to fill it up with some Bitcoin art. There's plenty of Bitcoin artists that can do the art part for you.
On the other side, there's art that's actual art, but I paid for it in Bitcoin because I know there's like the Bitcoin art stuff, but like between you and me, and I guess the listeners too, a lot of the Bitcoin art is like unbelievably nerdy to the extent of, if you get interviewed by someone mainstream, then it just like puts them off. So I've got, you can't actually see it in this right now. And obviously it's a podcast, so I'd have to describe it anyway, unless they're video watchers. But on the other side, I've got a lovely painting I bought in Ghana for Bitcoin on the beach. Because it always surprises people that you can buy stuff with Bitcoin in sub-Saharan Africa and developing countries around the world. And I've got some hodlers as well, but they were gifts. I don't actually buy them with Bitcoin. So thank you very much, Lena. Love your toys. And Ricardo, I hear you have a family, so that might be a nice segue for your family to get them a little hodler as well. And then everything you see I bought with Bitcoin, which is kind of nice.
Nice.
That's the link there to an extent.
Cool. I wanted to get into your travels. I know you said you're taking a hiatus for a second, but last time I was paying attention to your posts, you were in Peru, I believe, with Paco, and you guys went to Motive, which is like way up in the mountains, and you guys were orange pilling Peruvian peasants. It looked like
peasants.
Yeah, I mean they were like farming like llamas and stuff like that. It was like super rural.
I read into the negative connotation of peasants, and I was like, oh god, where are we going with this? But no, it's true. Like they are campesinos. They are salt of the earth people that don't have a lot, and for a lot of these Peruvians, they don't have a proper pair of shoes. So it's the context of these places is really important, and something I try to get across with my videos and documentaries. But yeah, I mean, Ricardo, you've got to pay more attention, man. I've been all around the world since then. I'm wearing the t-shirt for Bitcoin Akazi in South Africa. So that's a township where they're using Bitcoin as well. And that's where Herman and Lutando, well, primarily Lutando now, actually, he's like sort of the chief guy that's going in and helping to onboard shops and demonstrate to people that Bitcoin is money first. And then after that Bitcoin could be a savings tool. Because whereas for a lot of the West, we have this optic of where do I save my money? Like, how can I save my money? How can I afford a house over the long term? That's sort of how we get orange pilled, I guess. I don't want to create a division here, but it's just for the sake of you sort of understanding the context. A lot of people in sort of developing countries don't have that saving idea. It's a completely foreign concept to them. And that was something that actually struck me while I was bouncing around Peru with Paco, is that so few people do save, so few people can save. So if you tell them like, oh, number go up and, Bitcoin's the best savings technology known to mankind, it's digital gold. They're like, I don't care. Like, I want to be able to, pay for my groceries. I want to be able to do something fun with my family this weekend. And I mean, an example of this approach to money is such that during the pandemic, when a lot of businesses were shut down, a lot of businesses just collapsed because they didn't have any savings for that rainy day or for a few weeks or a few months time. So demonstrating that Bitcoin is actually really good money as a medium of exchange works a lot better in a lot of these places, such as Bitcoin Akazi, even in Cuba as well, because of course Bitcoin is also censorship resistant money. There's also the angle that a lot of these people in these places are unbanked, and they might be unbanked because of KYC restrictions. Because Whereas, where I grew up in the UK, it was just normal to have a bank account. And from the age of about 12, you probably have one because you could prove your proof of address or your parents' proof of address and their jobs and that sort of stuff. If you're living in the Ivory Coast, which was the case for some of my colleagues when I lived there in 2019, they didn't have a proper birth certificate. They didn't have a proof of address or a proof of employment. They're paid in cash. So a bank looks at that and goes, well, I'm not going to bank you, because of the KYC, AML requirements, whatever it may be that come from above. The bank teller in the bank is just following those orders. It's not their fault. It's just the way the system has been created. And obviously with Bitcoin, all you need nowadays is an internet connection, a phone number, or even in some cases you just need a phone number, because there's certain Africa-centric solutions like Machankura, where shout out to KG if he's listening, where all you need is a mobile phone number, and I think it's in like 8 or 9 sub-Saharan African countries now. So like we're getting more and more sort of developing country-centric solutions, which is really cool to see. And I take a lot of pride, and I really try to push the envelope of documenting and reporting on these advancements and these stories through my YouTube channel and through writing. And of course there's some overlap with Bitfinex as well, because in March, I'm sort of dancing around the place, but I'm giving you lots of stuff to pick up on. I went to Turkey on the Bitfinex Financial Freedom Tour.
Okay.
So thanks to Sheil and my sort of friendship with him, because we knew each other when I used to work at Cointelegraph. And I think he likes that I do like a sort of Bitcoin only or a Bitcoin first message. He was like, you should come on these financial freedom tours. And so we went around Turkey with Steve the Bitcoin, whose real name is Danny. And we created a load of content about how the Turks are managing with a hyperinflating currency and not a lot of job opportunities, and a real, how do I describe this? A real sort of love for speculation and shitcoins and all those wonderful things, lol. And how you get a Bitcoin only message across through that. Because of course, Bitfinex is it's written down there, isn't it? The original Bitcoin exchange. And a lot of the Bitfinex guys I know really care deeply about Bitcoin and what that means for financial empowerment and financial freedom. So yeah, I'm on a hiatus of travel at the moment, but that also means that I'm able to spend this entire summer editing, scripting, writing, presenting, and trying to make my content better and better, so that hopefully it reaches a wider audience, because ultimately that's my goal. Like, why do I get out of bed? It's to try to help people learn, understand about Bitcoin, and at least, at the very, very least, remove some of that heavy baggage and that heavy stigma that often clouds people's judgment of Bitcoin.
You've traveled to a lot of places. Like, you've been probably almost to every continent in your Bitcoin travels. Like, where would you say is the most interesting place that you've been as far as like Bitcoin adoption goes?
Ooh, I guess it's funny because there are two angles, right? Like, a lot of these places are super interesting just generally. Like, I went to China when I was in Hong Kong, because in Hong Kong I was trying to understand how crypto heavy Hong Kong is, and well, it turns out it's very, very crypto heavy, and yet at the same time you can buy $15,000 worth of Bitcoin cash in hand over the counter in various shops. So there are certain things that are like just sort of blow your mind. Like, I literally saw people with rucksacks full of cash handing them over at the counter, and I like was trying to interview them and be like, hey, want to go on record and explain to me like what you're up to here? And they're like, no, I don't want to go on record, but obviously, yeah, I'm buying some Bitcoin or I'm buying some Tether, whatever it may be. But while I was in Hong Kong, I went over to China, and it's funny because the conversations I had with Bitcoiners at the conference was there was the first sort of Bitcoin Asia conference there called Bitcoin Hong Kong or something. And the Bitcoiners were like, whoa, bro, don't go to China. Like, everyone's kind of like fearful of China in a way. And anyway, I took the train up to Shenzhen, met up with actually a journalist there, and had dinner with her, ended up doing karaoke. And it was incredibly safe, incredibly chill, and of course, incredibly surveilled. I've never seen so many cameras as in China. And one of the sort of it's just inaccuracy, and one of the mistruths of the Bitcoin space is that China banned Bitcoin. Of course, you can't actually ban Bitcoin, because when I was in China, I was like, okay, well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the mempool. You couldn't get on BBC, you couldn't get on Facebook, you couldn't get on Instagram, but you could check the mempool. And then secondly, I sent a Lightning transaction, then I sent an on-chain transaction, and then I tried to do some other like Bitcoin stuff in China just to prove that, okay, even if the government says it's banned Bitcoin, and in reality it only was like putting heavy restrictions in place on Bitcoin mining, it's actually very, very difficult. Well, it's impossible to actually stop Bitcoin altogether or to censor it or whatever. So a lot of the sort of interesting travels I have is when you go with an idea in mind and then it's just the reality hits you and completely checks and completely corrects what you thought previously. I mean, Cuba was another one that was certainly fascinating because I went there off the back of reading Alex Gladstein, the CSO of the Human Rights Foundation. He wrote this book called Check Your Financial Privilege, and one chapter was about these Cubans using Bitcoin. And I was like, okay, how, why, are they not going to get thrown into jail for that? Cuba's obviously communist, one-party state, authoritarian. There's no free press, there's no media. There are newspapers in Cuba, but they're stuff like, literacy rates hit 99%, and sports do wonders for your health. It's honestly like comical how silly the news is there. It doesn't talk about the fact that they've just rounded up another load of journalists and thrown them into jail, or the fact that rations and food is running out once again, and yet tourists can eat like kings. There's no free press, as simple as that. And so I read that chapter and was like, I need to go to Cuba, I need to check this out. And when I got there, I was blown away by the resourcefulness, by the tenacity, and by I guess also the gumption, just to be like, okay, we're living in communist Cuba, and yet we're going to assemble and we're going to teach people about Bitcoin. And we're going to do it in a peer-to-peer, not quite censorship resistant, but a way in which I kind of picture a hydra. You chop off one head and then another head, like two heads grow, because they're all on Signal groups, Telegram groups, their own sort of chats, and they use a lot of solutions built by Bitcoiners who've also lived in those kind of totalitarian regimes. Like, for example, the LNP2P bot on Telegram, where you basically talking to this Telegram bot about buying Bitcoin or selling Bitcoin, and it connects you with Bitcoiners after that. And it's all peer-to-peer, but it's done through Telegram. The guy that made that, and his name escapes me right now, and I feel
his name's
really
Francisco,
bad.
and
Francisco,
he's from Venezuela.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So he lives in Argentina now. I was with him in Prague recently, and I'm so sorry, Francisco, if you are listening. But those kind of tools, because obviously he's Venezuelan, he knows just what it's like to live in an authoritarian country. Those kind of tools being used by the Cubans as well made me really like hopeful for the future of Bitcoin, and hopeful for the future of Bitcoin in places where it's needed most. It's and so yeah, that was another really interesting use case. The documentary I made by that or in Cuba is on the Cointelegraph YouTube channel. And I really wanted it to be my own documentary, which is like part of the reason of going independent this year, because I really wanted to be like, okay, well, you're a journalist, but you don't actually own any of this content. It's people see your face and like, oh, it's maybe they recognize that it's me and it's my work. But I wanted there to be a place I could be like, okay, that's mine. This is my work. This is what I put my blood, sweat, and tears into. And we'll see how it goes over the next couple of years, basically. But yeah, I guess Hong Kong/China was really interesting. Cuba was fascinating, and then this year I've kind of been all over again. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I don't want to talk about just yet because I'm working on documentaries about them. But basically, have you ever heard of a place called the Isle of Man?
In the UK? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's it's like this tiny slither of landmass between the UK and Ireland, and there's 70,000 people that live there, and yet there's 30,000 registered businesses, and there's 30,000 millionaires. So it's a really interesting.
So is that like one of those like tax shelter kind of like Panama Papers places, like Panama or like the Cayman Islands, for example?
I would be hesitant to call it a Panama Papers place, but it's basically because it's its own independent government, and it's one of the oldest governments or democracies, parliaments rather, in the world. It's called the Tinwald, I think, and it started like in the early 1800s. They've always had their sort of autonomy. They've always been able to create their own laws, and I don't know how it's transpired that way, but yeah, they have 0% on capital gain, 0% capital gains tax. So Bitcoin is, it's a great place to buy and sell Bitcoin there. And secondly, their corporation tax is very, very low, and their income tax is very, very low. So yeah, if you are a recent high net worther and you don't mind crappy weather, then it might make sense to move there from the UK, because I think that moving from the UK to the Isle of Man, as it is technically in the UK, it does make sense. But basically,
is there like a Bitcoin community there?
Yes, there is. I mean, there's Coin Corner, the biggest Bitcoin exchange in the UK, is based there, and there was a few other Bitcoin companies that are based there. There's there's a higher penetration of Bitcoiners there than I would say anywhere else in the UK, really, which is really cool. And I went there to interview those guys to get a sense of what Bitcoin is like on the Isle of Man, but also to do some really silly and fun things with Bitcoin, because there's also quite a high penetration of merchants there. Like, I'll just say private jets, and I'll leave it at that. But that's where we went with it, because I'm trying to find ways to break into the mainstream more, and the mainstream is obsessed with number go up and like when my bag's going to pump, and which billionaire is buying Bitcoin next. They don't care about to pinch your word from earlier, peasants using Bitcoin in circular economies in the remote areas of Machu Picchu and Cusco. I mean, I find that fascinating and I love that kind of stuff, but unfortunately it just does not seem to resonate as much. Or maybe they don't know about it yet, I don't know. But I'm always like a little bit disheartened when another Bitcoin podcast starts, another number go up discussion commences, and you're like, come on guys, like, we've got enough number go up content to last an eternity. What we need now is more use cases, more sort of encouraging stuff, and more examples of how Bitcoin is making the world a better place, because we keep saying it is, but now if we've got like the real world actionable evidence that people can watch and be like, oh shit, I can just use Bitcoin to buy my groceries, or I can use Bitcoin to send it overseas because it's a better remittance tool than a TransferWise or a MoneyGram or one of those other predatory companies. I think people just need that little nudge in that direction, and then suddenly they do it. Like, I got a message this morning from a guy in New Zealand who said, like, I love your work. You inspired me to set up a Phoenix wallet for the first time, and this is the first transaction I just made. And he sent me 20,000 sats. And I'm like, yes, it's working. Like, people are getting a little fire lit underneath them, having watched this kind of thing, because they realize that, oh crap, like, I don't just need to use Bitcoin as a savings account. I can also use it as peer-to-peer money, as the white paper and as Satoshi intended. And I sometimes worry and I get a bit concerned. I mean, can I ask you that question? Like, do you get concerned a bit, especially when you watch like the discussions around Donald Trump at the moment, the discussions about Dell or whichever billionaire is going to buy more Bitcoin? Do you ever wonder that we've sort of got too distracted by Bitcoin?
I don't really like care too much personally about like what Donald Trump is saying. What's more concerning to me is this Coinbase like holding all of the Bitcoins for all the ETFs, and then potentially maybe lending out like paper Bitcoins and superseding the 21 million limit. There was like a story that broke not that long ago about how Coinbase is like lending like the BlackRock ETF Bitcoins off chain, like where you can't see what's really going on, and maybe there's paper Bitcoin. So, I mean, that to me is like far more concerning than any potential like, politician saying like, oh, I like Bitcoin, or oh, Bitcoin must be stopped. Like, that passing laws is like a process. Like, people have feedback in that process. Like, to me, like these closed door conversations of like, hey, give us like 10,000 Bitcoin that don't really exist so that we can short the market. Like, that to me is far more concerning personally. But
yeah.
I don't know what you think about that, but.
No, I agree. I mean, but at the same time, like, it's this collateral sort of discussion, right? Like, people want to be able to use Bitcoin as collateral at some point. Like, I like hope that one day I might finally be able to, afford to buy a house or an apartment or whatever, but do it with a collateralized loan against my Bitcoin. And I know that like that's dodgy, and paper Bitcoin it sort of reflective of that paper Bitcoin thing, but that's what rich people do, right? they get hard assets and then they loan against it to do interesting stuff with it, whether it is start a new business, or like start a charity, or start something, or like Motive, start an NGO, which hopefully changes the world. But do it.
Credit needs to exist in Bitcoin too. For Bitcoin to succeed, there does need to be some sort of like credit aspect to it, because credit is like the lubrication for the economy.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I struggle with a lot of like really hardcore Bitcoiners, in that like credit is so human. I'll lend you this. It's just part of almost like social interaction and that kind of thing. So I don't know. What Coinbase is doing is obviously, it's exceeding the 21 million supply cap, which is like one of the most important tenets, if not the most important tenet of sort of Bitcoin as a protocol. So that's scary, but. But hopefully, I mean, what will happen? It'll just blow up again, right? It'll just be another FTX. and it'll just be absolutely colossal, and we'll have a huge blow off top and a huge correction again, and everyone say Bitcoin is dead, and then we rinse repeat and see you in 2028.
Do you feel like this bull run has been different than prior bull market cycles?
Are we in a bull run right now? We must be, right?
We hit a new all-time high, so I'm going off that. Like,
okay,
a couple months back, we did hit a new all-time high. So I would say, yeah, we're in a bull run if we hit a new all-time high, even though right now it may not look like it. But then after the halving, immediately after, like, it's usually kind of lackluster until there's a God candle that drives FOMO. So I think we're kind of like in this transitionary period. But like, does this one feel different to you than prior market cycles you've been around for?
Given that preamble to the question, yes, absolutely. Because my conversations with friends still, to an extent, fall on deaf ears. And yet, if we rewind to 2020, when I was like going a bit mental with Bitcoin stuff and like really trying to evangelize Bitcoin as hard as I could, and finding myself a bit exasperated sometimes because I was putting so much energy into like helping my friends learn about Bitcoin. Like, you've got to like buy this thing. Like, it was during the COVID hysteria as well. So I felt like I got through to a lot more people a lot more easily than right now, in which people. I mean, I can pay a few friends near where I live in Bitcoin for goods and services, or for like pizzas at their restaurants, or there's a Mexican restaurant nearby where I can also spend some Bitcoin. But like the other day, this is an example. Like I have a few hardware wallets left over that are completely sealed. I haven't used them at all. They were like gifts from people, and I was like, I don't need them. I'll give them to these guys, especially as I know that they've been snacking Bitcoin through me spending Bitcoin at their restaurant and other people spending Bitcoin there. And I was like, oh mate, like got this hardware wallet. It's free. It's worth 100 quid or 200 quid, whatever it's worth. And he's like, mate, don't worry about it. I'm just going to sell the Bitcoin once it pumps again. I'm like, okay. So these conversations over these past 2 years, and the fact that Bitcoin price has effectively doubled from this last summer to this summer, it hasn't persuaded you to like maybe finally take it a bit more seriously. It's like, nah, man, it's fine. I'm like, okay. And just other situations like that and conversations like that where people are still just not switched on to what is going on in the world, financially speaking, and what Bitcoin's potential is to reshape and like completely change and transform the world. They're still not there. And yet I know that in 4 months, 5 months time, if and when Bitcoin does break that last all-time high, they'll start asking questions again. So I feel like if we're in a bull market, then there's still not enough retail sort of interest from people who are like on the fringes, might have like 100 quid worth of Bitcoin, but have never really taken it seriously. They've never gone further than buy 100 quid on Coinbase, leave it there, and that's the thing that I just find so tricky sometimes. It's like, what do you get them to go from like that 1 out of 10 to 4 or 5 out of 10? Just enough to hold their own keys. That's kind of like where I'm like, I don't need them to run a node. Like, it's fucking cool if they do, but I don't need them to go, fully down the rabbit hole. And I don't want people to do that either. Like, I think that Bitcoin should be a, just take it or leave it sort of thing. Hold your keys and that's you. You don't have to go and then start listening to us on a podcast. You can go and live your life.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you feel like the FTX scandal kind of like dissuaded a huge portion of the retail investor market that maybe got burned? Like, that was like one of the biggest exchanges. The US government was like telling people like, no, this is like the regulated exchange that's, like going to protect you. And then all these people had a horrible experience. Like, do you feel that that's kind of dissuaded people from participating in the bull market this cycle?
Yeah, I think it's had an impact. I think less so in Europe because FTX just didn't have that high level of penetration. I feel like, each continent had its own sort of individual blow up. Like, there was loads in Southeast Asia, whether it was like Vold or I forget the names of them. There was a period when
there was like Celsius, like Three Arrows. There's a bunch of,
but they were a lot more sort of US focused. Like, Celsius actually was pretty popular in certain countries in Europe. I know, like in France, for example, I remember Paris Blockchain Week, they had like this huge, massive stand and everything. They clearly invested a lot in it. And I found Alex Mashinsky like talking to like the ex-CEO, disgraced CEO of Celsius. I found him like once talking to the guy that like gives you paper towels in the toilet about Celsius and how he should be his own bank. Just like, oh my God. Like, from that moment on, he became Alex Mashilsky. Like, he just did not stop shilling. But in like Southeast Asia, there was a period in Cointelegraph when I was reporting for them where it felt like every day there was a new Asian exchange that just blew up, and it was because of their exposure to 3AC. They do that thing of like, we are solvent, and then 2 days later there'll be a tweet saying, oh, we've suspended withdrawals, sorry guys. So in Europe and like the circles that I'm sort of in, the FTX thing had less of an impact, but then there's a lot of Americans that live near me in Portugal, and they were definitely burnt by FTX. But a lot of them, if they were burnt by FTX, they were probably also burnt by Luna and by other sort of scandalous kind of things. They're all great learning curves, right? But I'd rather these friends didn't lose a lot of money in these frankly fraudulent crap exchanges. So yeah, I think, yeah, that's definitely dissuaded people, but I think that also people's memories nowadays are so short and getting shorter. So there will be more retail euphoria when it comes back, and it will be sillier than the last one. And I just really hope that, again, we can get through to people that we need to, take custody of our coins. And if you are going to leave your Bitcoin or whatever shit coins on an exchange, then make sure it's one that's got a really, 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 really good track record, and you're not going to lose sleep over it. I mean, I was speaking to a quite a prominent Bitcoiner recently who doesn't custody his coins, and I was like, "What the hell, man? Like, you advocate for this publicly?" And he was like, "Yeah, but I still think that custody is too challenging for my other half if I was to pass away or whatever. Whereas I know that if I leave it with this exchange, I'm not going to say which one it was, I know that the Bitcoin will definitely go to my family and to my 2 kids." And I was like, like that's, he's willing to overlook, that whole thing of self-custody, be your own bank, blah, 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 because he's worried about that inheritance thing. So, and he's a guy that has a Bitcoin company that's been in the space for 7 or 8 years now. And so there's still going to be a world in which there is lots of people rather custodying on exchange, and lots of people who are able to take custody of their coins themselves.
That's amazing, to be honest. That's pretty shocking that somebody that has that kind of history with Bitcoin would be taking that kind of risk with their coins. I know we were just talking about like the negative impacts of crypto and perhaps perception of people that had negative experiences during the last market cycle. But right now, like in the developing world, like it doesn't seem like that's deterred anyone, and that adoption is still going pretty strong. Would you agree with that observation from your travels?
Yeah, it depends where you are. It's always dependent on if you have a high concentration of Bitcoiners in a specific regional territory. Like you can go to, like if you just watch my videos about Peru, then you're going to think that Peru is one of the most Bitcoinized countries in Latin America. But it's just because I'm actually trying to seek out these circular economies to understand, do they work? Like I'm intentionally going to somewhere where I know there is reportedly people using Bitcoin on a day-to-day basis. And I'm sort of incredulous seeing them use that. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, I mean, there's one example, or there's a few examples to show that people are genuinely using Bitcoin every day at all hours of the day. Because at one shop we were in one town where this Motive NGO is operating, I went to pay for, like, I bought like a drink or water or something. The lady was like, "Oh no, it's 2 p.m. so you should come into this corner to scan the QR code." And I was like, "What?" She's like, "Yeah, because from 12 till 3 p.m. the sun is so bright on the shop that you can't scan QR codes with the old crappy phones. So you've got to walk to this part of the shop to scan it." And I was like, "Okay, that's the sort of like Bitcoin behavior or financial behavior that comes from only using that tool on a day-to-day basis." It also says that like QR codes are a bit crap for Bitcoin UX. And I totally agree with that. I think that we need to move away from QR codes into something a lot more streamlined, especially for, payments, because with my phone, I can double tap it and I can pay Apple Pay immediately. And that's kind of the UX that I think Bitcoin can beat and eventually will beat. But, QR codes, it looks crap. And I mean, I was in Switzerland at a conference 2 weeks ago, and everyone was paying in Bitcoin at this bar. And the barman was like, "Oh, more Bitcoin people, more Bitcoin people." God, like boring, because it's always a little bit slower than just when you tap to pay. And in Europe, everyone just pays in card now. It's a real shame, like from a financial privacy perspective, but in terms of like ease of use and UX, it's like phenomenal. And anyway, I went to pay and I just paid with my ring, which I'm not wearing right now, but it's like an NFC ring. And he's literally like, whoa, what the hell is that? Like, where do I get that? Is that Bitcoin? And I was like, yeah, mate. And he's like, but that's like faster than credit card. And you didn't even get your like phone out. That's amazing. And I was like, huh, okay. So he's just dealt with like 25 Bitcoiners at this Bitcoin meetup. The bar just, happened to accept Bitcoin. He's an employee there. And suddenly he's like, I want Bitcoin because the UX was better. And so I think that's something we need to sort of bear in mind with Lightning payments in particular. But if we go back to the actual answering of the question, if you go to somewhere outside of these motive communities in Peru, then you might really struggle to find anyone who's remotely interested in Peru. So it all comes down to that thing of, okay, has there been some OG in 2010, 2011 who's decided to live in, say, Costa Rica and start to educate people about Bitcoin? I mean, this is the case for Bitcoin Jungle, right? It's similar for Bitcoin Akazi. It's similar, which is in South Africa. Similar for the sort of Bitcoin Uganda and Bitcoin Dada. I mean, these are more locals doing these projects, but there has to be enough touch points for there to be like this sort of critical mass of Bitcoiners in a place before it actually spreads properly. Other than that, it's really hard to find actual people using Bitcoin because it's not like they're going to go around and shout about it. Like the classic story I always give is that my driver in the Ivory Coast, who used to take me to work in 2019, was using Bitcoin to receive it from his son. And it's just like, he was the guy that sort of orange pilled me in the sense that he proved to me that it's useful. Like, it was much better than Western Union or MoneyGram. But like, Guillaume wasn't like a huge Bitcoin advocate or an evangelist. He was just like, man, yeah, it's a way better way.
He was just using it as a tool.
Yeah, because we get a bit sucked up in or sucked into this. Bitcoin fixes this, the Max Kaiser, like, let's get really excited about this hyper Bitcoinization thing, when for a lot of people it will just be like a knife and fork. And I get that, when a knife and fork, or when fire was invented, there were certainly some absolute evangelists that were going around saying we need to start using fire, but a lot of people would just be like, sweet, I've got fire now, right, back to whatever I was doing, and things go on. So I'm really going around the houses answering this question, but yeah, basically, as long as there are some locals that know about Bitcoin, then yeah, it's going to spread. Or if not, then you need some Bitcoiner to move there. I mean, look at Lugano, right? And like, part of the reason why Lugano's Plan B is panning out is because some members of the Tether Bitfinex team moved there, right? And like, from that penetration of like, okay, some OG Bitcoiners, they then get to work in Bitcoinizing their towns or cities. So
I think they're uniquely positioned too, because like they were able to provide infrastructure. Like there's like a POS system that like over like 300 shops in Lugano like are all plugged into, which is kind of what sets it apart from other places where it's just like individual merchants that may or may not download an app. Like, to have that infrastructure, I think, is very, very important for adoption.
I mean, I think they have an employee who literally goes around and just checks that their POSs are doing fine. But on top of that, you can now pay city taxes in Bitcoin. You can buy houses in Bitcoin. You can buy a Lamborghini in Bitcoin, like up to like 100,000 Swiss francs, no KYC. I know because I tried as part of a video. I don't actually have 100,000 francs, unfortunately. But point being, like, it's a bit like, Peter McCormack in Bedford, right? No one would know what Bedford is until Peter came along and said, okay, I'm going to start this podcast and I'm going to try and Bitcoinize my town through the vehicle of this football club. And from then, it puts Bedford on the map, and it starts to, people think, oh my God, Bitcoin must have really high penetration. But in reality, like, if you go there and you try and interview people about Bitcoin in the streets of Bedford, no one really cares still. It still remains quite niche and quite esoteric. So yeah, I think we're still some ways away from, mass adoption or hyper Bitcoinization, all this kind of stuff. It's the numbers are still too small. Like, like from like working at Bitfinex, right? Like, when the numbers tick up, it's like, okay, this is like, we're kicking off. It's going to be mega bull run season, and retail is back interested again. But I think still we've just got those that have been interested for a few years. Although if you look at the Reddit for Bitcoin, the subreddit for Bitcoin, there do seem to be more and more newbie questions being asked there, which is always quite a good sort of arbiter for where we are in the sort of Bitcoin. Like, I would love to see a chart of time education, like, and see if like the adoption cycles of Bitcoin education are similar to, I reckon they probably just mirror the price. But I think that hopefully we're leaving another trough of education and going into like a ramp up in terms of being able to educate more and more people about Bitcoin, which is, what I want to do, and I guess what you want to do as well, right? If you're hosting this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. We're winding down to the end of the podcast. How can people keep tabs on what you're working on? Where can they see your documentaries once you are ready to put them out? Tell people how they can do so.
Thanks, Ricardo. Yeah, Joe Nakamoto on YouTube. I am trying to upload a documentary from around the world once a week. It's looking more like once every 10 days because it's so much bloody work. But I love doing it. And I'm hoping that it's something that you can, if you're listening to this podcast and you're clearly very interested in Bitcoin and crypto, so you will enjoy it. I promise you that. And then also I've made it so that you can send it to your partner, significant other, or friends or whatever who are not into Bitcoin, and they won't be like, oh my God, it's too much like gobbledygook. It's like if you send someone a Michael Saylor video the first time and they're like, who the hell is that squeaky voice dude who's like talks like a million miles an hour and it's like kind of like a Bitcoin Stephen Hawking, you know? Like the idea is that it's approachable, it's shareable, and it's not like me in some ivory tower talking about how Bitcoin fixes this. I'm trying to get these characters to do the talking for me. And if they want to start off with a video, I would recommend the one that's called Off Grid Steve. It's called like he sold everything to move off grid, and it's the most viewed video on my channel right now. Yeah, so I'd love that if they could follow me on YouTube. If not, Twitter, Nostr, TikTok, Instagram, all the surveilled social media apps. You can find me on there as Joe Nakamoto. But please just be careful of scammers and spammers and all that sort of stuff, because in this crypto space, you know what it's like. They're everywhere. But yeah. Thank you very much if you do.
Indeed. Well, Joe, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to interview you about your travels and your perspectives on Bitcoin adoption around the world. It's super interesting to talk to somebody that's actually been there, like boots on the ground, and has that firsthand knowledge. So thanks for coming on the show and sharing that with us.
No, thank you, mate. And you've got a great radio voice, man, or great podcast voice. That's a very 90s thing to say. But yeah, it's lovely.
Nice.
So, no, thank you very much, mate. I appreciate it. And yeah, keep doing good things with Bitfinex Talks.